Welcome to another episode of Catch This. My name is Trudy Ray. I know there has been a lot of talk in the media about whether the COVID vaccines prevent disease, infection, or both disease and infection, meaning that not only will a person not get sick, but that person also cannot be infected and cannot transmit the virus to others. But how can we distinguish between the two scenarios, and how is it possible that you could still be infected even though you're not sick? The type of immunity that prevents both disease and infection is called sterilizing immunity, and it is mostly thought to be induced by neutralizing antibodies. In this video, I want to explain what that means. In order to cause an infection, a virus has to enter a cell by attaching to a host cell surface protein called a receptor. Now, the receptor isn't there for the virus. Receptor proteins typically have other functions that actually benefit us. For example, the ACE2 receptor, which aids entry of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, into our cells, is prevalent on lung, kidney, intestinal, and arterial cells, where it normally controls blood pressure by regulating the volume of fluids in the body. And that makes sense because ACE2 stands for angiotensin converting enzyme 2. ACE2 is also an important regulator of the immune response, especially in the context of inflammation. Another example of a receptor is sialic acid, the cell surface molecules needed for entry of influenza virus into our cells. And this is a small sugar molecule that is really important for cellular communication. But viruses are very good at mimicking other proteins that typically attach to those receptors, and they enter the cell that way. Once they're inside the cell, they can start their replication cycle. And the mechanism of the cycle and the order in which things happen varies from virus to virus. But they all have one thing in common. They ultimately result in the production of new viral genomes and new viral proteins, which can then package those new viral genomes to form new viral particles, which can then exit the cell in search of a new cell to infect. And rinse and repeat. Now, if an antibody detects the virus before the virus has a chance to bind to a cell receptor and before it can enter the cell, and if this antibody not only binds the virus, but also interferes with its infectivity somehow, like by blocking the molecules needed for binding the cell receptor, or by preventing the viral surface proteins from undergoing the necessary structural changes to successfully enter the cell, then that antibody is what is called a neutralizing antibody because it neutralizes the biological effect of the virus. However, not all antibodies are neutralizing antibodies. Some antibodies simply bind the virus, but not in a place that would prevent its binding the cell receptor, so that infection is not prevented at all. Or some antibodies bind the virus, but that binding does not directly prevent infection, but it flags the virus so that the right immune cells can recognize it, process it, and destroy it. So this type of binding but non-neutralizing activity can also be very effective at sequestering the virus so that it doesn't cause any more downstream harm. Typically, sterilizing immunity is thought to be achieved by neutralizing antibodies, but really, any immune activity that prevents viral replication induces sterilizing immunity. So what about the COVID vaccines? Do they induce sterilizing immunity? It's complicated. We do know that most people have very high antibody levels in the months following vaccination, following the second dose, or now the third dose. When there are a lot of circulating antibodies specific to a virus, they can quickly sequester the virus before it has a chance to enter our cells, infect them, and replicate. In this sense, the vaccines do induce sterilizing immunity within a certain time window. However, we also know that antibodies contract or their levels decline over time. It's not normal to have high antibody levels to every single antigen we encounter all the time and at all times. That does not mean, however, that you are no longer protected from disease. Even if antibody levels are low, there are still memory B cells which can quickly react to the virus when they detect it and quickly make more antibodies, large amounts of antibodies. We also have memory T cells which can quickly react and destroy virus-infected cells. So we are still protected from disease even if antibody levels are low many months or years after vaccination. But what does this mean in terms of infection? Well, it is likely that when there aren't a lot of antibodies around, circulating constantly, that the virus may have a chance to infect some cells, replicate, make more copies of itself, exit the cells, and infect other people. Even if that person never actually gets sick, because in the meantime, the memory B cells came in and made more antibodies, and the memory T cells killed the virus-infected cells. This means that even while the vaccine may induce sterilizing immunity for the months following vaccination, it's possible that it no longer does so months down the road, allowing vaccinated people to transmit virus to others even if they don't get sick. That is why it's probably a good idea to get a third shot, if you are able, so that we can cut down on some of this community transmission while we're still in a pandemic. I know people are afraid that this is going to go on forever, but it won't. Eventually, it will slow down, and while we will see the virus re-emerge again and again, it won't cause infection and disease at such a high level as we're observing right now. Most likely, it will blend in with all the other seasonal respiratory virus infections, as second, third, and subsequent infections will become milder. Because your immune system has seen the pathogen before, and those infections will most likely manifest themselves as colds. I want to clarify that if we expect a vaccine to prevent any and all infection, if we expect a vaccine to induce sterilizing immunity, we are setting the bar really high. Many people believe that the measles vaccine induces sterilizing immunity, but there is evidence to suggest that that is not entirely true. The only vaccine that we know induces sterilizing immunity is the HPV, human papillomavirus vaccine, which prevents genital warts and cervical cancer. And it is an amazing vaccine. I mean, a vaccine that prevents cancer? Sounds like a no-brainer to me. Oh, one more thing. The term sterilizing in sterilizing immunity has nothing to do with fertility. If you have sterilizing immunity, that does not mean that you are infertile or that the vaccines cause sterility. More on that in episode 10 of Catch This, linked above. That's it for today. Thanks again for listening. My name is Trudy Ray. I'll see you next time on Catch This.